Mm. Okay, how's everybody doing? So welcome to the DSKUS industry panel for 2023. I see that some people are still coming in. I'm sure people are having problems logging in and stuff like that, but we are going to go ahead and kick it off. I think about 50 people on here so far, so about half the people who signed up at least. But my name is Dr. Casey Bennett. I'm a professor of data science here at Hanyang University, and I'm going to be moderating this panel. And we have some great panelists here, and I'll introduce them in a second. But first, before we get started, we have Josh Lustig, who is from the U.S. Embassy in Seoul, and representing the embassy and I guess the U.S. government in general. And he's going to give us a little welcome message because they're basically paying for all this and making it happen. So, Josh.
Thank you so much, Casey. Hi, everyone. 안녕하세요. I wanted to thank Casey and especially today's panelists today. When we at the U.S. Embassy decided to form this partnership with Casey and Hanyang University and DePaul and Indiana universities and all the schools and institutions that are supporting this, we really saw an opportunity to bring together some of our two countries' most innovative leaders on technology to share lessons about how they're adjusting and solving some of the world's most critical problems. The relationship between our two countries goes back a really long time. 141 years ago, the US and Korea established a formal diplomatic relationship, and this year we're celebrating the 70th anniversary of our bilateral alliance. So over that time, we've faced and overcome all types of challenges together. But honestly, I have to admit that I was a little bit puzzled when Casey asked me to speak to you today. And that's because my primary job is to plan youth programs. I have no expertise in advanced technology or AI. I'm not even really sure what big data is, and I could barely get my Zoom to work this morning, I promise. But then as I thought about it, and today is all about fostering dialogue between Korean and American students, which is exactly what I try to do all day. Today our panelists are going to focus on how their industries are using new technologies to manage the threats from climate change and lessen the burden of our stretched supply chains. And really, these are the biggest issues facing the world today, and particularly young people in our two countries. And, unfortunately, we see the evidence of this all over the world. Koreans and American young people are facing higher costs due to inflation. And for anybody who's in Korea right now, you saw our very odd weather the past couple of weeks, which brought us very lovely cherry blossoms, but it also brought us forest fires all across the country, including some in downtown Seoul. So it just shows how these issues really affect everyone. They affect governments, individuals, and companies. So working together to solve them is not optional. And thankfully, some of America's and Korean companies that you hear from today are really leveraging new technologies to try to tackle some of these issues. And even if me as a government employee can't explain anything about these new technologies, I'm really, really happy that they can. And I think we owe them a lot for sharing their wisdom and lessons learned today. So I just wanted to thank Casey for setting this up and thank all of our panelists for coming in today. And thank all of you, all the young people, all the students who are listening to this panel today. I hope that you will learn a lot. I'm also going to be taking my notes as well. So thank you all, and I hope you enjoy the panel.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much, Josh. We appreciate it. And of course, we are all very thankful for the embassy and the U.S. State Department providing the funding to make all this happen. I think it's a great opportunity. And like you said, there's a lot of opportunity. It's an opportunity for the students, but there's also a lot of opportunity for the United States and South Korea to work together, both scientifically and also business-wise and other ways to try to solve these problems. And that's a lot of what this is about. So we appreciate the warm introduction. Thank you so much. So to kick off then, I've already introduced myself, and Josh even managed to speak in Korean briefly, so 안녕하세요, 여러분. But we're going to speak in English here because I'm probably the only one. Youngho's on here, he speaks Korean. So let me introduce all the panelists so that we can get started. So Ryan Brown here is from Coupang. He is the Representative Director of Fulfillment Services, which means He's the guy who manages the logistics from getting the package when you order it to your front door, I think, pretty much, sort of, yeah, pretty much. All right, so Ryan Brown, of course, they're from Coupon. And then we have Deepti Bhanti. Deepti Bhanti is now with Amazon, and she's working with customer experience, I believe. Deepti, I think that's your technical title. Yeah.
Yes, I'm an analytics specialist.
Okay. And before, she spent a long time. I think you were kind of sort of in management, like in the healthcare industry for a while, right? So you have a lot of healthcare industry background as well. So
Yes, that is correct. Yes.
okay. So DP has a wide range of industries that she'll hopefully cover today, a little bit, and maybe a little healthcare side to it. Then we have Samantha Duscher. I probably butchered your last name. I apologize. She is from Bosch. She's a manager of Industry 4.0. Bosch is kind of, unlike some of the other companies, focuses more on the actual manufacturing of products and stuff like that. I'm not sure exactly what Industry 4.0 is, Samantha, but maybe we'll learn today. So.
Absolutely. Yep. And you did great on the last name, Duscher.
All right. So yeah, so Industry 4.0, we'll find out exactly what does that mean. Is that the new wave of manufacturing and stuff like that? And then we have Mike Anderson here, who is from Google, and he works for Mike. He works on the sort of the marketing side, I guess. He does a lot of I don't know, what would you call it, marketing consulting for like Google clients and stuff like that.
Yep, that's right. All sorts of different things related to advertising and marketing challenges clients face.
Yeah, great.
I'm happy to be here. So thank you.
Thanks, Mike. So Ryan from Coupon, DP from Amazon, Samantha from Bosch, and then Mike here from Google. So we're going to break this into halves and try to make it somewhat interesting. We have about an hour and then we'll be done. First, we're going to talk about the global supply chain issue. And then the second half, we're going to talk about climate change. Of course, there is probably some overlap between them. So I'm going to kick it off by starting by asking one of the questions. So the first question we're going to start with is something that is, I think everybody is familiar with, the coronavirus pandemic. I'm sure you guys have heard about it by this point. So in recent years, a lot of companies were faced with, this ongoing coronavirus pandemic and supply chain bottlenecks and significantly higher prices for raw materials. And a lot of people, I think, for the first time, realized just how sensitive and interconnected our global supply chains are, right? When you couldn't buy toilet paper in the United States, people were like, oh, wow, right? Or, in Korea too, there were things that were missing on the shelves. So my question for all of you guys is, has that affected your company? And how is your company kind of trying to deal with those challenges, or maybe the customers you work with, Mike, or things like that? These kind of supply chain bottlenecks that we've seen, that coronavirus unfortunately revealed to us. So if anybody has comments.
So Casey, if it's okay, I can start off. So good morning, everybody, first of all. And, I don't speak Korean, but I watch K-drama. I'm a huge fan. So I know, like, thank you means kamsahamnida. So just a couple of words in Korean I do know. So I work for Amazon, and I think everyone's familiar with Amazon. It's a global e-commerce business across the globe. And definitely, we all still remember how it was during COVID. It was an unprecedented global event. World pretty much came to a stop. People were just kind of trapped inside their houses, a lot of human tragedy. But on the business side, there were winners and losers. So businesses that adapted, pivoted their business model to the new circumstances survived and even grew. And so though I didn't work for Amazon at that time, I was still a customer of Amazon, both on its web services, Amazon Web Services, as well as Amazon Prime customer. So things that we took for granted, right? Like you said, toilet paper, of course, face masks, disinfectants, all of that, you could not just take it for granted. It would come in 2 days or same day prime delivery. There were delays. So definitely, I think Amazon supply chain was impacted. But at Amazon, especially after starting here, I've realized that it's really good at turning challenges into opportunities. And that's really what it did to just kind of deal with the COVID situation and keep its workers safe. It actually took this as an opportunity to create its own supply chain of COVID, right from ordering the PPEs for its employees, to developing in-house COVID testing, to developing even test kits, and also its own diagnostic labs. So kind of, the whole end-to-end supply chain. Similar story with semiconductors. There are numerous factors that affected the semiconductor supply chain. And again, Amazon took this as an opportunity, this challenge, and designed and brought that in-house. So it didn't rely on third party as much. And that helped accelerate the timeline and also control the end product, because now the Graviton processors are tuned for cloud computing. So just a couple of examples on how the company I work for kind of rose up to that challenge.
Interesting. Yeah, bringing it all in house, I guess, makes a lot of sense. I imagine I imagine other companies have had to do the same thing, like basically create their own supply chains. Anybody else, Ryan? Shannon?
Yeah, actually, Bosch. So I'm located in Anderson, South Carolina, and we have a saying in the South, right? When life gives you lemons, we make lemonade, and that's what we did too, right? In about a few weeks, we set up our own production line to make masks for all of North America. We did the same thing for hand sanitizer. And then she also mentioned the chip shortage and how, that affected so many things, right? Now Bosch is investing in facilities, right, to, produce more of these semiconductors, which are in so many of our products. So in the beginning, right, we had the issue of, people shortage, right? Coronavirus, people were calling in sick. And if we're a manufacturing line, we need associates. They technically can't work at home, right? So that's why we focused on mask and hand sanitizer. But then on the flip side of that, we're having this shortage of actual materials. So we had to get even smarter with how can we use AI to help us with inventory, to scheduling, really trying to predict in some way how these shortages can be manageable, right? So not to echo exactly what you said with Amazon, but it is very similar.
Great.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, I think that the interesting thing, we all faced when that shutdown happened. And I mean, it feels like now I think we're like 2 years away. It still feels like one really long year that lasted 3 years. But, at the beginning of 2020, when all of these shutdowns were happening, like those shutdowns were really the root of the disruption. Because if you don't have, you think about all of these different industries that come together to provide the front end of the supply chain, and that's where that disruption, caused. It wasn't a wave; it was like the absence of a wave, which created all of these shortages. And we have a similar experience. Luckily for us, we had kind of two things in our favor at Coop, and I work at Coupon. You can probably see that word right behind me. One was, our structure from the beginning was to build out this, like as best we could, an end-to-end supply chain. We're not actually manufacturing the products though. What we have in-house is our own private label brand, and 90% of our suppliers on the private label side are small to medium business, small to medium sized businesses. We call them SMEs. And because we already had existing relationships with them, for example, I think, the COVID example, the one we remember as well as the toilet paper, were like the mask shortages. And, we had a similar experience. We turned to our critical partners on the private label side and controlled pricing, secured supply of masks so that, we could get masks out to our customers, but also in-house for our own workers to keep our part of the supply chain working.
That's good. Yeah, I mean, I think that's interesting. I just might have something else to add to it. So
Sure. Yeah. So Google is a little bit different than these other three companies because Google's business model is primarily digital advertising. We do make products like the Chromebook and the Pixel, and those were both affected by the same global supply chain issues. But they're a much smaller portion of Google's revenue than Amazon or Bosch or Coupang.
right. You do work with companies.
So
You do work with companies, though. I mean, has there been have you seen a situation where, like, one of the companies you guys are working with, doing advertising, can't get a product, or they can't get a part for a product? Have you seen situations?
yes, absolutely.
Yeah, go.
Yeah, even though we primarily, I guess, buy and sell digital ads, the coronavirus pandemic still did have a huge effect on our business. And I guess you could say the supply chain of demand for search ads. So lots of products, lots of companies that sell products didn't need search ads anymore because they couldn't sell their products even if people wanted to buy them. So there was no point in advertising for them. So one of the major, I guess, things that my team was doing during the pandemic was building forecasting models to predict when the demand or supply of products would return back to the baseline so that advertisers could plan when they needed to turn on their advertising again. So this is, I guess, a second or third order effect of the pandemic, but it still absolutely kept us very busy trying to model these things during the pandemic.
That's kind of interesting that you don't really think about that. You think you can see that there's like no toilet paper, but you don't think about how that impacts like advertising or other logistical issues like downstream. It's like kind of cascades through the economy. Is anybody else? So we heard a lot of things about creating your own supply chains and stuff, but do any of you guys have any memories from something that happened to your company where you just couldn't get a product or you couldn't get a component? I think maybe Samantha, maybe this is something maybe where you could, since you're on the manufacturing side, like what did you do? How did you guys adjust to that? If you can't get a part, you can't really build the product to sell. So, like what strategies can you adopt in these kinds of situations, right?
Yeah, so we're a power steering and an automotive electronic, facility. So automotive electronics, the electronics that go in parts. So you can imagine those use the semiconductors. So yes, we had severe shortages, right? And that just kind of goes back to we had to just be so strategic and how many people we would bring in, right, to make sure, like, if we really were, slow on how much products we have, or we're trying to manufacture, that we weren't, more associates out on the line than necessary. But there were some difficult times where we did have to shut down shifts because we physically could not, send products out the door. It was a challenging time, and there really was nothing else we could do other than it had to kind of just move as much as it could and then sit and wait. And it's all about communication to the customers, and just true transparency. And maybe that's not the answer that people were expecting, but sometimes it really was just a screeching halt.
Yeah. That's interesting. I think, Ryan, I think on your side there with Coupang, maybe DP can talk about this too, but I can imagine people are buying things that on, I don't know, Amazon Prime, or they're buying things like on Coupang and stuff, and it doesn't exist. What do you do in those situations? How do you source things to stock your sort of retailing kind of experience or whatever in that situation?
Yeah, I mean, I think, that's the premise of all e-commerce is great selection, and fast delivery. And I know, and I was at Amazon in 2020, so I got a pandemic in two companies. But the challenge is if it's not there, it's not there. But I think for Coupang, and I can say a little bit is the Amazon experience, as well as this principle of great selection is anchored. If you're going to do it right, you're going to anchor it in this relationship with a lot of different suppliers, and that is your best bet to overcome that challenge. And if you're in a manufacturing industry, you might have one or two suppliers for a certain part that you're bidding on. And that creates a much more, I think personally, a much more challenging environment than if you're in a retail industry, commerce industry like we are, or where two of us are, where you have myriad suppliers and you're hoping that your system works well enough to pull the right results of what's in stock and what's available to your people. And then you've got to use the existing pieces of your supply chain, so you're getting freight efficiently moved into your buildings efficiently, because if you can't get the freight, you can't sell it. And for us in Coupon particularly, that was a strength, because we have this front end of the supply chain where we're getting things directly at import to put into our warehouses. It's part of how we built the speed of our network. But I think I gotta believe that it's more challenging when you have a manufacturing environment and you've got specific items that you must have to build something. Whereas you think about consumables, paper towels, toilet paper, masks, you have so many different ways that you can source those, and you're going to be beholden to the strong relationships you've built in the past. And I think, thankfully for Coupon and thankfully for my experience at Amazon, those relationships existed, and that, it didn't mean the shortages didn't exist, but it made it easier to fulfill the needs of the customers.
That actually skips ahead a little bit to another question I was going to ask later, but I'll go ahead and ask it now. And I think this is something probably all of you can talk about. So a lot of the people in the audience here, not all of them, some of them are probably more on the business side, or a few of them are from the embassy, I think too. But a lot of the people in the audience here are data scientists, or they're students studying data science or AI, those kind of things. So one of the things I'm actually interested in, I'm actually very interested in this personally as a data scientist as well, is this whole coronavirus pandemic, and more broadly, because it's not just coronavirus. I mean, we've seen this with the war in Ukraine and other issues. It's not just coronavirus. That's just one example of a problem. But all these disruptions to the supply chain, has it forced you guys to change the way that you deal with things from a sort of data perspective? Have you become more data driven, or have you started to use more analytics, or what's the kind of role of the data and the data science and AI and kind of overcoming these kind of business challenges we've talked about? I could see DP maybe talk to that.
Sure. Yeah. So I think just kind of relates to the last question too. One of the ways to overcome and be more nimble and agile, right? To adapt your supply chain to whatever may be happening, from regional conflicts or raw material shortages or a pandemic, is to have visibility into your supply chain end to end. And that's only possible if there is a unified data kind of picture that you are able to see. So one of the things, Amazon differentiates itself is that whole unified data that allows it to be more nimble. It can look at analytics based on that data to see where the risks are. So if inventory is, becoming short in, say, a warehouse, it's able to make adjustments very quickly. Look at trends from last few years to identify again risk. It's all about being able to proactively look at risk instead of being reactive, before they happen, to put some mitigation strategies in place rather than after they happen, because that really affects customer sentiment. So really, I think the visibility into the supply chain, breaking those data silos in your inventory system or your ERP or your fulfillment system to get that unified end-to-end picture is really important.
Isn't that difficult though? I can imagine maybe Amazon, but for a lot of companies, isn't it difficult to be able to gather data about the entire supply chain? I don't know, maybe I'm naive, but I don't know if anybody can comment. I guess my question here is what are the challenges in terms of actually getting access to that data and then being able to understand it and make use of it, I guess. I don't know if I want to comment. Mike?
Yeah, so this is my own personal perspective here, but my impression is that Google tries to evade some of these problems by making as much of its, I guess, supply chain independencies in-house as possible.
Right.
So Google builds data centers all around the world to kind of mitigate the risk of any like location-based problem. And I guess we'll talk more about this in the second half, but these data centers are largely clean energy powered to mitigate dependencies on fossil fuels or fuel shortages in general. But it also helps when most of the product is a digital product.
Right.
And so that's not possible in the same way for I guess the other companies here.
Yeah. I'd be curious, Sam, that's actually going to come to you next too. I'd be curious, like because you probably are getting components from people all over the world. How easy is it to how easy to just go to one of your suppliers and be like, give us all your data? You know, I mean, I think like DP was talking about it. It sounds awesome, but I gotta imagine it's not so easy. Yeah.
Definitely not easy, right? So the industry 4.0, right? That was my title. What that means is everything's connected, right? I mean, we went from steam and water electrification to now autonomous machines, right? But everything's connected. But yes, going to a supplier and getting data when they're completely different companies is very, very challenging, right? I would say if there are data scientists on the call, that's always the hardest part that I tell any data scientist at Bosch. It's like the algorithms are easy, the AI, like anyone can do that. It's getting the data, which is the challenging part, in a format that's usable. And there's different techniques, right? Different communication, but I would be lying if I would say, yeah, we just keep asking. It's a challenging endeavor.
Yeah, I can imagine. Ryan, I saw you unmute yourself.
I think, yeah, it's easy to say, it's easy to visualize.
Yeah.
It is really, really hard. I think everybody's on the same page here. It's super hard.
Yeah, we're trying to get some
You need-
disagreement.
yeah, that's right.
It's really difficult. Well, let's move into a slightly different topic then, something kind of related though. One thing we've all also experienced recently is sky high inflation. I think all of us have, like in Korea in particular, like the inflation on the price of food has been insane, and people are like, talking about having to cut back on so Chuseok and Korean Thanksgiving and all this kind of stuff. And the inflation's really high. They raised the price of delivery fried chicken like a couple weeks ago, and there was an uproar, right? Because everybody loves fried chicken in Korea. But we've also seen in the United States. So another thing I'm kind of interested in related to this is, has inflation impacting your business? And if so, how? Or if, for maybe a Mike or some of you guys who work with customers of Google or whatever, or Ryan as well, your customers, have you seen inflation impact either your business or your customers, and how exactly? Changes in buying habits or changes in what the company, how it operates? So anybody want to talk about inflation? So
I mean, inflation in general, right? Everything's more expensive, it increases revenue and to keep our margins. I mean, for Bosch and manufacturing, what this, whole kind of pandemic did, it really made us try to focus on projects that had a great ROI, return of investment, right? Before, I feel like maybe there was more flexibility of maybe we can hire more associates, or maybe we can get that project that costs a little bit more money. But now in manufacturing, when there's kind of, stricter spending, we definitely have to focus on less than like a year return of invest, right? Or developing our associates that can now, do a little bit more if we can't get the extra headcount. So that's a little different for manufacturing, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm curious on like the customer side in particular, if we've seen impact. So DP, you want to say something?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's like a double whammy, right? Because on one side, your costs are increasing because fuel is more expensive, cost of shipping may be more expensive, your wages may be going up also, labor cost. because of wage pressures to employees. And then on the other side, customers in these periods of uncertainty, as one of them, you rein in your discretionary spending, which is you shop less on Amazon, for instance, right? So most businesses kind of see it from both ways as well, the revenue impact as well as the margins.
Interesting. Yeah. Mike, yeah.
Sure. Yeah. In digital advertising, it's actually very similar to what Samantha was saying, that ROI turns out, like return on investment, turns out to become extremely salient here. So suddenly marketing budgets at companies that advertise with Google are a lot tighter, and marketers, much more than usual, need to be able to show that their marketing spending is effective and is driving revenue for the company. So there's been a significantly increased focus on return on investment for advertising. And my team and my part of the company has had to be pretty flexible and pretty creative in coming up with experiments or other ways to demonstrate that ROI in order to basically justify continued advertising spend.
Yeah.
Well, I guess maybe, I wish I could, Casey, I wish I could give you some vehement disagreement here, but I think, but instead I can go in a different direction.
Okay.
I think because our focus, being on our customers, we're thinking like, well, our goal is let's figure out how to minimize. I mean, everybody's in the same boat on inflation, so we all have the same common ground. And I want to make sure like this inflation doesn't, sink our customers. We want to protect them ultimately as best we can, and that's going to be through competitive pricing. And so while I totally relate to the idea of ROI-based decision making, I think the other component that I would add is it makes us a lot more aggressive on internal operating efficiency and looking at every part of our supply chain. It actually relates back to the data science part of this, and that taking the existing, if you think about how we started this conversation, we talk about with the pandemic, and Deepti made this great point, like some companies really grew, and if you grow really, really quickly, you probably have an opportunity when inflation is on the rise to go back and say, okay, let's make sure this is as efficient as it could be. And so you can take the technology that you have, you can really look at the data of the operation for the past few years and try to figure out how can I optimize this so that I'm ultimately not just running the same way I was running before and passing these inflated costs on to customers, but instead making my own operation run more smoothly so that I mitigate the cost of inflation to the customers.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think that makes sense. Obviously, there's also the customer side of it too, and trying to be more efficient is also a sort of part of that is trying to pass on or protect your customers. So I think that definitely is interesting. And that, of course, this brings us to something else that I think is interesting, and this will probably be the last part of this half of the discussion today, but also probably maybe the most sensitive part. So you guys feel free to say what you want. And before we talk about this, I should say that we are all, everything we're saying is our own views and not necessarily those of our company. So be very clear to everybody in the audience. But my question for you guys is this. So speaking of inflation, U.S. government passes the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act. And along with that, there's the recent CHIPS Act that is restricting, the supply of semiconductor technology to certain countries, or basically trying to control the supply chain in different ways and telling companies, you can do this, you can't do that. You can buy or sell from here. You cannot buy from sell from here. So my question is for you guys, is related to some of these political things. Is this a thing that you guys are thinking about as a company, or does it affect what you do in any way when there are these geopolitical tensions? Has it affected your business at all, I guess? Jump in.
I can say a bit here, although I think the others will have a bit more to say. But this, so these issues do affect Google because it's a global company and it also has its own supply chains to build these products. I know that Google tries really hard to diversify, like both the countries and the suppliers in general. But something else interesting that Google has that probably exists at other companies, but I don't have as much experience, and I know it's a major focus at Google, is having like pretty strict codes of conduct and ethical standards for their suppliers. So some of this stuff is already built in that Google will only do business with suppliers that themselves meet certain standards, either for like energy efficiency or for like their own like manufacturing practices and the way they treat their laborers and stuff.
Very good. Titi, you want to add something?
Yeah, so just on the heels of that, I mean, as you mentioned the CHIPS Act. So Amazon is kind of part of that Semiconductors in America coalition, which includes, by the way, Google as well. And it called on Congress to fund the CHIPS Act. So I personally do understand kind of, again, from a supply chain perspective and to promote innovation within the countries, to bring, to incent, and through having these programs, right, to bring some of the manufacturing back in the United States and to spur the research initiatives as that will draw also the talent and the skills, along with it to support. So I kind of do hear that because the global supply chain is so fragile that countries are just, it's a reactive mode maybe, but it does make sense to kind of bring it back so that it's more under their maybe controlled environment.
Yeah, I know in Korea, actually the CHIPS Act caused a lot of consternation because actually Korea is one of the major semiconductor manufacturers in the world. And we were going to get somebody from Samsung on here, but they didn't get back to me in time, so they're not on the call today. But I was talking with them about this. One of the issues that SK Hynix and some of these companies have is a lot of their manufacturing is like they have a lot of factories in places where you can't have a factory there anymore because the technology is banned from being sent, for instance, China. So I guess I maybe go to Sam. I'm actually going to call on somebody here. You guys, Samantha, you guys have a lot of factories and stuff like this. Do you now have to kind of take into account like where you produce your products? If you're doing it kind of globally or where your suppliers are producing their products, does this matter to you guys on the industry 4.0 manufacturing side?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is kind of a sticky topic because also Bosch it's a German company, right? Although it is global, so they're dealing with the European Workers Council all the time as well. But in Anderson, what we've tried to do is have long, intricate value streams to where we make one component and then we deliver it to ourselves in the same building, right? So there's stuff like that all the time in manufacturing of, yes, let's try to keep it like more, in-house where the two components can connect to each other. So yeah, absolutely. In manufacturing of whether it's in Mexico, Germany, Canada, the United States, we're always thinking of, the closer they are to each other, the better.
Great. Yeah, I mean, I don't know, Ryan, if this is an issue that affects Coupang at all. I'm not really sure as a retailer.
Yeah, I mean, I think the direct impact of CHIPS Act is not something that has an effect on us. But I think all of these moves with the Inflation Reduction Act and the CHIPS Act, they're about supply chain security. I think you said it really well. They're a reaction. And they're trying to prevent, they're trying to secure the supply chain. They're trying to, sort of provide a layer of security that might not have been there before in these geopolitical environments. For us, our focus is on our customers, and a lot of that is more about trade, whereas the Inflation Reduction and CHIPS is more about investment and then technological transfer. But for us, the trade component is still important. So we're, as all of these things change, we do have to be, even though we're not manufacturing semiconductors, we are thinking about what's the potential impact on trade? We have a Rocket GQ service that's providing cross-border opportunity for businesses to sell on Coupang from the US and Taiwan into Korea and vice versa. And obviously those three countries are all very closely connected to these two broader pieces of legislation that we're talking about. So for us, it's to ensure we're going to continue to do that. We have to be aware of what's going on and what the impact is.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, we won't get into it too much. Politics is always a dangerous subject to get into, but it is interesting. It is going to be interesting to see how some of this plays out, because I do think there are going to be effects on businesses, even like Coupang, kind of downstream, in terms of the products that you can get, and like you mentioned, products across borders and stuff like that. It's going to make things a little bit more complicated. So we'll see how it plays out. Anyway, so we've already kind of used up about 30 minutes, probably a little bit too long. So we'll kind of leave that for the global supply chains. There are other things we could talk about, but I think that's pretty interesting. But we'll move into the second half of this conversation, which is about climate change, right? So I'm going to start off with a softball question that you guys can just feel free to talk about whatever you want. But we all know climate change. It's been an area of scientific research and debate and global collaboration for the last 25 years, probably longer, I guess, 30 years, 40 years. But more specifically, over the past 10 years, I'm curious about how the business world has changed, maybe in the last decade related to climate change. Are businesses doing things differently? Are you, has it changed your strategies at all in any ways? And my question is, do you have any personal experiences from your kind of career or your work experience where you've seen climate change or something related to it affect the business somehow? And so I'll just open that up to whatever you want to
So
talk.
this one for me is really easy because I'm in the mobility sector of Bosch, right? So our sister plant, Charleston, South Carolina, was a diesel plant. So you can imagine how, with times changing and climate change definitely becoming more and more popular, that their whole products have to change, right? They have to get manufacture completely new products. So they've switched to e-machines, right? Here in Anderson, right? Although we make oxygen sensors and automotive electronics for automotive transmission, we've also had to look into new products. So we've recently invested in something called the fuel cell, which is hydrogen technology for electrification. So for the manufacturing, yes, it's completely done a 180 on what type of products we produce. And there's also the flip side of coins of maybe we can use data science on how we can manufacture cleaner, right? Because new products is one thing, but even on the older products, right, an oxygen sensor, let's say we're manufacturing it and we're starting with paste, and then you cook it and it becomes a plate, and then you have to cook this plate in an oven. But what if we can use AI to optimize this oven, or how long these plates are in the oven? So there's constantly data science use cases like that as well, of if the products don't change, the ones that we are producing, are we producing them clean, right?
Interesting. Yeah, great.
That's really cool.
I disagree, Ryan. You're supposed to disagree with me. So, like, okay.
Just don't bake them at all. Sun dry them. No, I guess I'm really passionate about this area. This is something that's important to me personally. And I think there's sort of, the experience is also, I think about managing a bunch of different facilities. I know throughout my career, I've been involved in like managing the environment part of the business as well as emergency response. And, I think it's undeniable that, we're seeing more climate extremes causing business disruption in the supply chain. So we've had to prepare plans. We just talk about these forest fires in the metropolitan area here in Seoul. We've had, thankfully, we had no disruption from that, but, we were monitoring it. We have a central monitoring system, and we're looking in the past, I think, the kinds of events that we were monitoring there's been a shift over the past 10 years that has included a lot more extreme weather, climate related things because they're just happening more frequently. But on the, on the day-to-day operations side, being in a retail company, e-commerce company, our impact is on the vehicle fleet and the packaging. And so we've done, we're thankfully, I think, experimenting with a bunch of different vehicle types. So we have a hydrogen vehicle that's doing longer haul moves across the country. We have a couple of different fleets of electric vehicles with different automakers. I think half of our fleet right now on Jeju Island is EV. We've got, I think everybody likes these EV vehicles. They're quieter, they're less disruptive to the neighborhood, and then you get the zero emission benefit. I could talk a long time about the packaging side of things, but I want to hear somebody else what their answer is too. So
I think I have another question about EV.
Yeah.
And we can talk about the packaging there if we get to that question. But yeah, Mike.
Sure. Yeah. So my answer will also be, I guess, a little bit personal. Google is, at least Google within it itself, is very proud of its commitment to clean energy. Like one of the first things that you learn about during the orientation and stuff is how Google considers itself a leader in renewable energy. There's a public commitment that by 2030, it's going to be 100% run on carbon-free energy, that sort of thing. I guess personally, that is like really good for my morale. Like I feel proud to be at a company that does things like that. And I think I notice it's a bit day to day, like some of they don't have much plastic in the kitchens, for example. A lot of things are recyclable instead of plastic. And some people complain about like it being a little bit more annoying to put your like, to not have a plastic cup and either have to use paper or a glass cup, things like that. But personally, like the benefit of like feeling proud of what the company is doing, for me, significantly outweighs that. And I kind of hope that my generation and the younger generations are going to be voting with their feet more and wanting to work at companies that take this stuff seriously. So that's how it affects me, like day to day.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I mean, we've all had that experience of the paper straw that we try to drink out of. And it's a little difficult. Someone thinks it's wet, you can't drink, but it's good for the environment. So it's a trade-off, right? A diwe biyong, as they would say in Korean. So, Deepti, something from the Amazon or healthcare side, even in terms of climate change?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, this is like, the rest of the panel, Casey, I hate to say, I do agree. I feel, it's personal. I just feel like there's such a mountain of data that climate change is real. It's really a crisis situation almost for the world. And if we don't do something really fast, really quick, then it may be irreversible. And, what does that say about leaving the planet for our future generations? So, Amazon too, just because of the scale of its presence and operations, it has also a lot of responsibility in that area. And it's doing a lot from, investing in renewable energy. It was the largest corporate purchaser of renewable energy in 2020, rolling out zero emission vehicles, working on packaging, reducing, the data centers. We haven't talked about the data centers, right? When we talk about cloud computing, really where it's happening is still on the planet Earth, not on the cloud. There are these hyperscale data centers that run. So how do we make those energy zero carbon as well as water positive? So Amazon has made commitments in that area to be water positive, for instance, by 2030. And there are it has ways to go, obviously, with other cloud providers out there, but it's making real traction, investing in technology. And for instance, in Oregon, it's not using potable water, but recycled water. And whatever is coming out of the data center, it's channeling it back into the communities for farmers to use. So those are some great ideas that all of us need to be thinking of, not just the governments and the businesses, but common people. It has to be top down, bottom up. And it's really a very serious situation.
Yeah, that's good. That's a great comment. And actually segues really well into the next question I have, which is about cloud computing. And I think all the companies here do cloud computing. I think every company on the planet does cloud computing now. And I think also for some of the students in the audience who are data scientists and interested in like deep learning and stuff, a lot of these kinds of, analytics or, machine learning, deep learning, data science stuff happen in the cloud, or also sometimes, like Samantha, we have products that are cloud enabled now, even in the industry 4.0. So one of the things one of the interesting arguments about cloud computing is that, as you mentioned, kind of deeply, is kind of the environmental impact of it. Like in some ways, we're reducing the need for people to have personal, computing power, localized servers, what have you, and we're putting everything in the cloud. But these data centers, they use up a lot of energy, and they produce a lot of heat that has to be dealt with, cooling issues, stuff like that. So one of the questions I guess I have is, do you think cloud technologies are a solution towards, kind of in dealing with the climate change crisis, or do you think they're going to make the problem, do you think they're going to exacerbate the problem, make it worse? Because they do use up a lot of energy. They do produce a lot of heat. They do produce a lot of carbon output, those kind of things. Like cloud computing, is it going to help? Is it going to hurt? And what, from a business perspective, are you guys doing, or what should we be thinking about? So just going to open that up to you guys. I read an article. I'll go ahead and say something here. I read an article about deep learning. They published an article, came out of like MIT. They published it in a big scientific journal, and they said, producing one big deep learning model for some of these computer vision algorithms basically is the same as like flying across the world in an airplane, the amount of carbon output. And it's like, oh crap, if we're all doing all these deep learning, all these data scientists are doing all this deep learning, we're going to destroy the planet. So my question for you guys then is, what do you think? Cloud computing, help, hurt? What do you think? Or what should we do about it?
Well, I have a, different perspective, I guess.
Okay, that's great. Disagreement.
So we're not, we're using the cloud. We don't operate our own data warehouses. But, I think about this as like, this is a new age of AI and machine learning, deep learning, all these things together. And I think it's like we're on the precipice of this rapid advancement. And I would equate it to the advancement like at the beginning of rapid industrialization. And you think about all the power and fuel that was needed for rapid industrialization, and now we look back at it and think it was wildly inefficient. So I don't know what the answer will be. I have no idea what the answer will be. But I think I think we're going to find that this is wildly inefficient, what we're doing right now, and it's incredibly harmful for the environment. But if I have any belief, it's that we're going to figure it out. Like we must also figure out how to move forward, but do so in a way that becomes far less of an impact on the environment. I think the innovation that's going to happen is going to produce data centers and computing capability that just looks radically different than what we're looking at today.
That's interesting. Yeah, Mike, you have something to add?
Sure. Yeah. This will again be personal, and maybe will be a little bit controversial. I don't know.
Good.
I think there are some industries or some products I think are inherently not sustainable. Like things based on fossil fuel. Like fossil fuel is a finite resource and produces carbon pollution, and is nearly impossible to make sustainable in the long term. I don't think data centers are inherently not sustainable. It's possible to power them off clean energy. It's possible to solve the water and heat problems. They're not perfectly solved now, and some data centers are more efficient than others. But I don't think it's it's an intrinsically impossible type of industry or product compared to some others. Although it requires like focus and needs to be done responsibly. Yeah, that's my personal take on it.
Okay. Samantha, you think that?
I was just going to make a funny comment. I would encourage all the students on the call to be an industry 6.0 coordinator and figure out the solution and explain it to the next generation. Because I kind of agree with Ryan. I think data is only getting bigger and bigger, right? And you mentioned it earlier, Casey. Like, man, if I had all the data from my suppliers and it was everywhere, man, that would be awesome. But yeah, we don't know what we don't know right now. I encourage the students to start thinking about it now.
Well, good. Well, then, I mean, I think it is an interesting issue with cloud computing. We'll see how it pans out, I guess. One other thing I wanted to talk about, you mentioned this earlier, Samantha, this notion of, I think you were talking about alternative mobility, and, kind of thinking about how people move around the environment. And I think this also touches on, Ryan was talking about like EV, electric vehicles and stuff like that. And of course, we've all seen these electric scooters racing all over the cities, at least in Seoul, they're everywhere. They're also in Chicago. When I go back to the US, they're all over the place. So you got to be careful. These people are like madmen on their little scooters. But my question is about moving around the environment in particular. And do you think, I guess I'll start with you, Samantha, because I think you kind of queued this up a little bit. But alternative ways to thinking about how we move people or how we move products or whatever around, the environment, basically around cities, whatever. Do you think there are opportunities there for that from a company perspective? And do you think there's any data science AI aspects to that as well, I guess would be my second question to that. So Samantha, why don't we start there with you?
Optimizing routes is 100%, I think, an AI problem. Even just think of like in a warehouse, right? We have automated guided vehicles right now, little robots carrying components from one side of the warehouse to the other side of the warehouse. How can we optimize that route? But yeah, like I mentioned, I mean, we really are just focused on new technology, right? Whether it was the hydrogen technology, whether it's the e-mobility. So I'm not sure how much more I can say about it, but yes, 100%. It's a good problem for AI.
Yeah, I mean, anybody else want to talk about it? Electric vehicles or logistics or moving things around the environment in an efficient way?
Actually,
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Samantha, please go ahead.
I was going to say another thing I thought of for technology, in case you guys aren't aware of it. I mean, we're also, there's RFID, right? There's intelligent supermarkets. So there's definitely different sorts of technologies to optimize it in addition to artificial intelligence.
Yeah, good. Yeah, so lots of technology. Ryan, you're going to say?
I'm good.
Did you have something to say, Ryan?
Oh, no, I think I'm good. I think, you don't need any more agreement, right?
Oh, yeah, we don't need you.
I owe you disagreement.
Okay. Well, then we move along into something else. Then I guess you said there's also a question for how climate change is affecting e-commerce, I suppose, which maybe not so much on Samantha's side, but the rest of you guys pretty much have some e-commerce element, whether it's advertising or retailing or whatnot. You mentioned packaging earlier, Ryan, but like, what are some ways that e-commerce is being impacted by climate change specifically?
Well, I think the impact on e-commerce can come from the disruptions to we talked a little bit about this already, the disruptions to the business with climate extremes. But I think the second piece is more regulation. In part of how this is going to be solved is to come up with industry-wide standards, and more regulation is a positive thing. But I think right now the companies, the regulation is behind. And so
What do you mean,
companies.
what do you mean by regulation?
Well, there's SEC disclosures on ESG that are pending. Those haven't been finalized yet. But that would be like the first big climate disclosure required for US publicly traded companies.
Oh, really?
Then you have specific environmental rules in Korea and in the US that are requiring more disclosure about the impact you have on the environment. But I think those are trailing where the leading companies are. The leading companies realize like, well, we need to be doing something now. That's why companies are independently setting goals. You know, I talked a little bit about the fleet, so maybe I'll talk about packaging. You know, at Coupon, I mean, e-commerce, those are the two things that make an impact. Our big push has been around, we call them eco bags, but when you get a delivery to your door, you know, we're trying to solve a problem of how do we get our customers their groceries and keep the groceries cool. And we realized that we could do it in a much more sustainable way. Typically in Korea, and if we've got DePaul and IU students on the line, this is going to seem a little strange, but typically in Korea, you get these delivered in a styrofoam box because of the insulation properties. And we've eliminated styrofoam completely from our supply chain that, you know, of what we control. And we've migrated now to this reusable eco bag. So your groceries show up at your door, usually in the morning. They're in a refrigerated bag. You take your groceries out, and then you put your bag back at your doorstep, and you take it back and sanitize it and reuse it. You know, the impact that we've had on that, in addition to eliminating all those styrofoam boxes, you know, had we been putting those in cardboard, and you know, we're talking millions of trees a year that we're not turning into cardboard boxes. So that's been a positive. And then the second thing, kind of a personal pet project of mine, is I learned that, you know, when you recycle plastic, whether you're in the US or in Korea, when you recycle plastic, the yield on the plastic that you put into the recycle bin is like 10% on average, which is pretty depressing, really. And the reason that yield is so low is because the plastic is so frequently contaminated. And by contaminated, I mean like, oh, there's residue of shampoo in the shampoo bottle. You're ruining it. You know, there's food residue. All of those things are creating this low yield. So a project that we have piloted now in a couple of cities in Korea, when you get that eco bag, you're unpacking your stuff, and you might, you know, like I just got Asian pears yesterday. And every time the Asian pears come in a plastic outer covering, and I take the pears out, put them in a little bowl, but then I have a plastic bag. And at that moment, that is a clean plastic bag. I guarantee it's going to be recycled if it doesn't get contaminated. So we're letting customers put their clean plastics back into the eco bag. It improves the experience for them where they don't have to take out the recycling every time they get a big grocery order, but they just put it in the eco bag, they put that on their front doorstep, and then we take that back. And the yield that we're getting on our clean plastic recycling now is like 55–60%. So it's a significant improvement. And then we're actually using that stream of plastic to create our small poly bags that we use for shipping. So we're really trying to get a closed loop system built here. Something I'm really very excited about. So
that sounds cool.
Yeah.
I didn't realize.
Yes.
But yeah, I'm in Korea too, so I of course get these eco bags sometimes. So I always It's interesting, actually. Deepti, you wanted to talk?
Yeah, so from my healthcare background, actually, one interesting example just on the heels of this was specialty drugs. So those are drugs like to treat cancer, you know, and arthritis, things like that. They need to be also refrigerated. So we are in the business of getting those drugs to the patients, and even if it was expedited shipping and you refrigerate it, sometimes because of postal delays and other factors, those medicines were, you know, they were expired when they got to the patients. So one ingenious idea, which I thought was awesome, was to use drones. You know, to deliver these drugs to patients, especially in remote areas, lower carbon emissions, low wastage, because now, just because of the technology, there were no delays that could be attributed to just snail mail. I think innovations are the answer. Humans are, when faced with challenges, I have strong confidence that we have the ability to rise to that challenge and innovate. And I think what I've heard so far on the panel, it's really there's more reasons to be optimistic than pessimistic about climate change.
Right. Well, then maybe kind of coming here, we maybe have about 5 minutes left. So maybe one final question for you guys, then maybe kind of connect back to all a lot of data science and AI students, and also some practicing data scientists here. What do you think the role for data science is in all this, or just data more broadly in terms of climate change? If I'm a data scientist, I'm a student in Korea or the US, and I want to do something about climate change, what could I do with data science or data or AI, or what do you see things happening at your companies related to that? Or do you guys have data related initiatives around climate change or issues regarding that? Do you guys use data at all to try to deal with the issue? I don't know, Mike, if you want to start this off here.
Sure, yeah. So there's a few answers. I guess at the basic level, data science is really good for optimizing problems. So data science is really good for finding efficiencies, saving energy, saving costs. I know that Google does this in their data centers. They have used like ML and AI to make their data centers more efficient. And this can be used in almost, data science can be applied to lead to incremental efficiency in all these areas. I guess for the younger generation, though, I would encourage you to think bigger than purely driving efficiencies. Some of the ideas that I guess Ryan and DT mentioned are bigger than just like driving at 10% efficiency, but you can also like come up with new ideas that completely revolutionize things. And I think that's where the real impact can be. If you think creatively, data can help here in the sense of describing or giving you a clear picture of what the problem is, where the sources and sinks of waste and energy loss are. But then I guess big and bold thinking is needed.
Samantha, anything on the Industry 4.0 side related to data and climate change?
So, I mean, just think of manufacturing though in general, right? There's these large facilities, right? Take a lot of energy, right? So even something as simple as like air compressor management with AI, or how can I optimize the line to run as efficiently as possible so I use least amount of energy, right? Not only to reduce the cost, right, and increase productivity, but to really reduce energy. So again, there's hundreds of data science problems like that of I just want to make this line run as fast as possible to not only help the business, but again, it could correlate to climate as well. So yeah, just think of large buildings, and if they're, optimal and they only had to run one shift rather than all 3 shifts, that's a win.
Do you think there's any kind of side question here before you move on to the next person? But Samantha, do you think there's any opportunity when we have all, Industry 4.0, as I understand it, there's like kind of IoT things happening. I assume that there's maybe something there related to data from interconnected devices and, dealing with climate change or environmental issues.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's some manufacturing, I forget exactly the location, but it is completely ran without any human interaction. So it is 100% optimal as it can be programmed. And that's all, correlated with IoT, Internet of Things. So yeah, it's a bright future for manufacturing and IoT and how that can correlate to climate.
Very good, very good. Ryan, anything else if you wanted to say something to the future.
Well, I guess,
transition
you know,
data.
I think given the opportunity to talk to data science students, I mean, I think you picked a really good area of study, and I don't worry about your employability at all. I think the advice I give you is, you know, data is a tool, it's information, but the context is really like the differentiator I see with the data people that I work with is really their contextual understanding, and that requires getting up and going to go see what it really is. And so I think if I, you know, we talked a lot about industry use and impact on a global level and a big company level, but on a personal level, if I give you any advice at all, it's to really never take your data as truth. Like always go evaluate the connection to the real physical world and understand the context in which you're getting that data and know where your flaws are. Because that'll make you, you know, as a person, a lot better informed about the impact of what you see in those numbers.
Yeah, that's good. That's good advice. I always tell my students to put their phones down for a second and just look at the world around them, because the real world is actually kind of cool. You actually look at it and put your phone down for a second. But of course, all of us are probably bad at that. DT, do you have anything like for the next wave of data scientists, especially, you know, from an Amazon, Google, Coupon perspective or climate change perspective, you know, you would want to say?
Yeah, I think, you know, cloud has made storage so cheap. So it's like plastic, right? So the data that has kind of exploded, which is a good thing. In that, it gives you the means to get the insight, and especially climate data sets, because they are so global in nature, and we want to collect as much data as we can at that granular level. Makes these, you know, I've read somewhere it was like petabyte scale, and you need the cloud to store all of that data. But really the benefit is to be able to turn that into insights and use that knowledge to impact change. So yeah, I feel like there is a lot of possibility, and, you know, the audience is the future. I'm sure, you know, there'll be a lot of innovations coming out, but my 2 cents here would be to use data responsibly, because there is a real cost to the planet's ecosystem to store that data and to use all the computing powers. We've talked a lot about data centers to turn that, analyze all that data. So if you're not using the data, just don't keep it just for, you know, for the sake of it. So yeah, just responsible, and there has to be a balance as well. But I feel it's if I can say that, it's a necessary evil, the data, because it is information is power, right? But let's use it and make real impact with that data.
I think it's a good. I think it's a good point. Actually, there's a certain responsibility that comes with all the computational power and energy and you know, resources that we're using in order to develop these insights. But we're actually also consuming resources while we do it as data scientists, and it's definitely something we should consider. And I like all this. We'll kind of wrap this up here, but a good conversation. I appreciate all you guys. Interesting to hear from all these different companies, how you guys are all being impacted by a lot of these issues. And I think it's really interesting. And I think Ryan too, you made a lot of good points about how it's the exact same issues in Korea and the United States, and, you know, across the world, across the globe. So I think these are definitely things that are global challenges that hopefully, you know, for purposes of this conversation, hopefully at least in South Korea and in the United States, that we can hopefully work together on to try to improve upon, whether that's scientifically or from a business perspective. So I know all of you guys, even though Amazon is American and Google is American as well, you guys actually have tons of employees here in Korea. So you guys are technically sort of Korean companies too. So anyway, we'll wrap this up. We'll thank everybody who attended in the audience. And we thank Josh for giving the welcome speech, and Brian, Deepti, Samantha, Mike, thank you guys so much for coming here and talking to everybody. Appreciate all your thoughts on everything. And I'm just going to wrap it up here. And
Thank you very much.
guys. So, okay.
Kamsahamnida. Thank you very much.
Samnida.
Thanks.
Yep. See you guys. So thank you guys so much. Like I said, DSKUS 2023. And thank you to the U.S. Embassy for funding this, and the U.S. State Department as well. So sign off here. Thanks, guys.
Take care.
All right. Have a nice day. Buonasera.